basically chosen first two judgments of my presentation is with respect to black money. So of course, I'll be dealing with these two judgments in a little while. But before I actually come to this black money aspect, these judgments, and I explain that what the tribunal has decided, I just wanted to give a little background about this black money law and how it's being taken so far India is concerned. We all are aware that black money law was enacted by the government in 2015 to crack down on undisclosed foreign income and assets. And that has in fact started showing some significant results. And as per the newspaper reports, what we have learned that till 31st May 2021, almost there are 166 orders which have been passed in black money law. So we can understand, we can see the seriousness of this particular law and the way the government is trying to crack down this undisclosed foreign income and assets. So one section which is important, and I thought I'll at least deal with that section, because that is section 10. So section 10 under the Black Money Act, it is basically a section which deals with assessment. So what does it mean? What does it say? It says that any information which comes to the assessing officer from income tax authority or any authority, then that assessing officer can make full inquiry for the purposes of information for undisclosed foreign income and undisclosed foreign assets. So that power of inquiry assessing officer is having, and that power is given to him under section 10 itself. So the time limit of completing this particular assessment under section 10 is 2 years. And the penalty tax, of course, it is 30%, but so far penalty is concerned, it is 90% of tax, which is 90% of tax computed. Now, so for tax authorities under Black Money Act, they are same as IT authorities, as specifically mentioned in section 116 of Income Tax Act. Now, there's one important aspect which I wanted to talk is, as per section 1B of Black Money Act came into force from 1st April 2016. That is assessment year 16-17. It means that any undisclosed foreign income earned up to assessment year 15-16 is not chargeable. Is not chargeable under Black Money Act, but it can be brought to tax under Income Tax Act subject to provisions mentioned therein. Now, there's one important section, that is section 72 clause C. It says that a foreign asset is acquired prior to commencement of Black Money Act, and also no declaration is made under section 59. Section 59 was basically introduced in the Black Money Act. It was a one-time window given that if anybody is having black money, is having any income which is stashed outside India, or some income or an asset which is not disclosed, then they could have done it under section 59 of the Black Money Act at that particular relevant time. Now that window is not there. Now, Black Money Act, then it shall be deemed that such asset is acquired in the year in which notice under section 10 is issued. All right. So the point is, generally the controversy comes that, what will be brought to tax? Is it the asset or the income? So the argument which generally is taken that, so for section 10, when section 10 is issued by the assessing officer, it may mean that if such foreign asset is acquired prior to commencement of Black Money Act, but did not exist at the time of commencement of Black Money Act, then it may not be brought to tax under Black Money Act, but that can be brought to tax under Income Tax Act, subject to the provisions contained therein. Because the reason, what is the reason behind it? Because such asset is not held by the assessee. Section 211 specifically talks about that asset has to be held at the time of commencement of Black Money Act. So it can be argued that section 72C applies to the foreign asset which is acquired prior to commencement of Black Money Act, and the assessee continues to hold it even after its commencement. So all these arguments which are there, which we're talking about, is of course it has to be tested, it has to be argued. But these are possible arguments which assessees are taking. Like for example, I have opened a bank account, and whatever proceeds were there before the Black Money Act actually came into existence, that proceeds were, it was not there. It was all was taken, all was disposed. So can you still say that, and the assessing officer comes to know that there was an asset which was acquired prior to black money coming into existence, but it did not, it wasn't there when black money actually became effective. So can you bring into account those kind of an assets? Of course, answers will have different views on this. But right now, what we can say is, because when we are talking about assets held by the SSC, so we can say since the asset per se was not held by the SSC at that particular point of time, so 72C will apply. And then we can say that Black Money Act specifically says that SSC need to hold that particular asset. If it is not held, then Black Money Act is not applicable. So this is just a little background about, what section says. There's one very important aspect of Black Money Act we have to keep in mind, because that is the prosecution provisions. Prosecution provisions under Black Money Act, it's very stringent. It's not like Income Tax Act. And if you see section 48, 54, 55, 57, all these are penal provisions, and they have to be read in very, very strictly. So section 54 of the Black Money Act specifically talks about presumption. And what is the presumption? Presumption is as to the existence of culpable mental state unless proved otherwise. So the accused in this Black Money Act has to prove beyond reasonable doubt that no culpable state existed, not mere probability. Now, section 48 talks about that these provisions are in addition and not in derogation of any other law. Now, there are no time-barred order under section 10. Like, for example, there's a time-barred order passed under section 10. So that cannot be a reason to escape prosecution. So even if their section 10 order has been passed for some reason, but that cannot be a reason or a ground to escape prosecution. So prosecution under the Black Money Act is a very stringent provision, and we need to really, really take it very, very seriously. And that's so far section 55 is concerned, it talks about sanction, which has to be necessarily taken by PCIT, CIT. It's a mandatory provision. And at the same time, PCIT and CIT can also suo motu issue directions or instructions to tax authorities for institution of proceedings. And section 57 is also very important. Why I'm saying? Because entry in records, documents in custody of tax authorities shall be admissible evidence. So we can't say that, there are entries in records that won't be. It is an admissible evidence, and it will, if there's something which is contrary or something which is not as per law, that can be treated or that can be taken against us. So these are basically the prosecution provisions, and this has to be seen. This has to be taken very seriously. And so for against ROR, when we're talking about, then it is willful failure to furnish the return of income within the time prescribed under section 139(1), where he had foreign asset or source of income, and there is willfully he has failed to furnish in the return of income details relating to such foreign income and asset. So then prosecution can be launched against ROR and against any other person if there's a willful attempt to evade tax, penalty, interest under Black Money Act, willful statement in verification of producing accounts, willfully abating any person to make false statement or producing false accounts. All this can be a reason to launch prosecution. Like, I just wanted to share my own personal experience for prosecution, then I'll get back to the case. Like today, what we are seeing that department is actually very aggressive on the prosecution side. Under the income tax, of course, we know about TDS defaults. If we make TDS defaults, even if the interest is paid, then also department is launching prosecution. And we are defending those clients before Delhi High Court, where prosecution has been launched due to, even if there is a reasonable cause, we're explaining, but the sanction has been granted mechanically and the clients are being prosecuted. There is one aspect of prosecution under the Income Tax Act, which is right now going on. And the other aspect is also, I just wanted to share out of a particular matter, where this particular SSC was an Indian person, and there are an Indian director, and there were other 4 directors who were basically foreign directors. Since the foreign directors could not be prosecuted because of the reasons, that only the Indian director at that particular point of time, and you'll be surprised to know that he was holding only just 1 share. So even that particular, because of that particular person holding 1 share, the Income Tax Department launched a prosecution, and even the sanction was granted, and that even he is being prosecuted. So they are taking it that very seriously. Even if your participation is non-equity or even if you're holding one share. So it's not that they won't launch, they can launch. So I'm not trying to, put a fear in anybody's mind. My only endeavor is because all my friends here mostly are chartered accountants or practicing chartered accountants. So it is advisable that any notice, any summons, anything which comes from the department, we shouldn't take it lightly. And the Black Money Act, because of late the cases which are which we are fighting. Of course, we are fighting on the jurisdictional aspects before Delhi High Court and Calcutta High Court. Those are pending. But at the same time, any notice, any summon, anything which comes to our notice or to our clients, it should not be taken lightly and should be answered. And immediately, that need of getting back to the department is important, because now the stake is too huge, and especially when you're talking about prosecution, the department won't even take a second not to sanction the prosecution. And we can see in courts also that they are not very, it won't be very easy for us to get this prosecution quashed. So in fact, in one of our trial court matter, the prosecution is still going on, which I'm also defending one of the company. So there the problem was with respect to non-filing of return. So it's not that we can't fight out, we can fight out. The problem is the time. It's been pending since 10 years. And we know how the courts are clogged with these kind of matters. So my only endeavor of talking to all of you was with respect to that, prosecution shouldn't be taken lightly. And in any circumstances, in any, you can think that the department may start or launch prosecution. So this is just a little background I thought I'll bring to everybody's notice before I actually start with the particular case now. So Sanjana, now can you please change the slide. So the first judgment which I'm dealing is coming from Delhi Tribunal, which is in the case of Jatindra Mehra. So the facts are, post-search proceedings in the name of R Group information regarding the SSC trust was received. The AO, relying on the above information, issued notice under section 10(1), arraying the SSC to be the beneficial owner of a foreign account where trust money was credited. SSC submitted that the ultimate beneficiary of this trust was his son and grandson, and he was only a nominal settler of trust. Further, when the trust deed was revoked, this money was transferred to the said account. However, ignoring the above submissions, assessing officer passed an assessment order considering the SSC as a beneficial owner of the foreign bank account and held that the foreign account to undisclosed foreign asset under the Black Money Act. The SSC preferred an appeal before the CIT appeal, who in turn had deleted additions on the ground that an account belonged to a non-resident company, not SSC. The revenue, however, carried the matter to the ITAT on the ground that SSC is a beneficial owner of the account since his name is appearing in the account opening form of bank account. I'm sure all of us have encountered this particular issue in our lifetime, because I think our clients have been haunted because of account, because that particular name is appearing in the account opening form. So similarly here also, the SSC was, notice was issued to him because of a bank, because his name was appearing in the account opening form of a bank account. Next slide. So the basic contentions of SSC in this particular case was that his name was mentioned as beneficial owner in account opening form out of gratitude and respect shown by his son. Moreover, none of the above document relied bear any of the signature of the SSC. The source of funds in the overseas bank account is on account of transactions with trust, where SSC was only nominal settler. The account in question belongs to Watergate Advisor Limited and not the SSC. The Watergate Advisor is a non-resident company incorporated outside India. Moreover, the control and management of company is outside India, where SSC's son is the director and sole shareholder of the company. SSC relied on the Mumbai bench ruling in Kamal Galani, where the issue is on the similar facts and decided in favor of SSC. SSC also relied on the Supreme Court ruling in the case of Vikram Singh Ji Gondal and submitted that taxation as beneficial owner would arise either on the account of contribution of assets or funds or on receipt of any distribution or benefit from such trust. Further stated that the issue of retroactive application of the Black Money Act was pending before the Supreme Court, and hence the money deposited in the overseas bank account in financial year 11-12, 12-13 could not be brought to tax. I'll just pause here for a moment because I've just mentioned that so far, on the jurisdictional issues, the matters are pending before the Delhi High Court, Bombay High Court, Calcutta High Court, and also Supreme Court. So what do we mean? What do we understand by retroactive application? We know about retrospective, we know about retroactive. So for Black Money Act is concerned, if you really see the section 1(3), it says that from which particular year this particular Black Money Act is going to come into effect. It says it will come into effect from assessment year 15-16. But when you see that particular section, it says that it is going to be given effect from 1st May 2015. So in a way, they have made the act per se is not retrospective in that sense, but yes, it is retroactive, because even when the act has actually come into existence, there is a date which says that by which particular date this particular act is going to apply. So there are different arguments for this, whether it is retrospective or it is retroactive, or assessment is that any money which is deposited in financial year 11-12 or prior to 15-16 can be brought to tax or not. There are numerous arguments which can be taken, but right now, for our understanding, you can say that the issue of retroactive, so far Black Money is concerned, because since it was made specifically applicable from 1st May 2015, so it is retroactive in that sense because a date has been given in that particular section. Next slide, please. So from the now the basic and the fundamental argument which the revenue took in this case was from the information received. SSC is a beneficial owner of the account in question as reflected in the account opening form. In terms of section 211 of Black Money Act, the credit in account should be considered as undisclosed foreign income and assets under the Black Money Act 2015. If the SSC was merely a nominal settler of the trust, his name would not have been shown as beneficial owner for the overseas bank account. If the intention was to confer all the benefits to son, the name of the beneficial owner in the bank account should have been of son and not of the SSC. Next slide, please. So what are the findings of the tribunal? The tribunal said, while referring to the definition of undisclosed asset located outside India, under section 211 of the Black Money Act, observed that in the stated facts of the case, only first condition, that is asset located outside India, is satisfied. However, the second condition is not satisfied since the asset is held in the name of Watergate Advisors and not in the name of the SSC. Tribunal also explained the capacity of a beneficial owner. The meaning was discussed at length by placing reliance on various acts and dictionaries, since Black Money Act do not define the meaning of beneficial owner. So tribunal also held that it is apparent that SSC does not own any share capital in case of a Watergate Advisors Limited, as well as it does not control the above company, as he does not have any shareholding or management rights in that company. So this particular fact is important, that does the SSC, who is claiming that his name only appears in the form but is not the beneficial owner. So we can actually find out that whether there is any share capital in his name, or whether he is controlling the company, or does he has any management rights. So these are very factual things which we have to ascertain before we take up the assignment of any particular client. ITAT held that mere mention of a name in the account opening form of an overseas bank account does not establish beneficial ownership, and rejected the appeal of the revenue. And thus, the issue was decided in favor of the SSC. Further, it also said that it is not disputed that account belonged to and was owned by Watergate Advisors Limited. That is a company incorporated outside India. The sole shareholder and director of the company was SSC's son, a non-resident under the IT Act. Son is involved in the management. So these are very important. Like, for example, these are factual things, factual analysis, which we as a chartered accountant, as a lawyer, have to do. Son is involved in the management and control of the said company. that even if management and control was partly in India and partly outside India, the said company does not qualify as an Indian resident as per Section 6(3) of the IT Act as applicable for assessment year 16-17. Further, the documents submitted, like certificate of incumbency, memorandum of family arrangement, confirmation from business relations, affidavit executed by Shri Rajneesh Mehra, all these documents proved that the SSC was not the beneficial owner of the said foreign account. So merely by having a name in the foreign bank account per se will not make me a beneficial owner and does make me liable under the Black Money Act. So this is what the ITAT has decided. And this is definitely a welcome judgment. And this is definitely going to help a lot of SSCs who are facing similar kind of issues. Yeah, next slide, please. So this was with respect to, now the second judgment, which is again on black money, is with respect to Yashovardhan Birla. This is coming from Mumbai Tribunal. This is also very important. And in fact, we have been hearing in news and the news like, wealth tax, that since this particular SSC had shown his income under the wealth tax, so his black money, so he was not liable under the Black Money Act. So in a way, that caption which I read in one of the newspaper was that disclosure in the wealth tax saved Birla under the Black Money Act. He was like that. So that's how the newspaper caption said, wealth order saves Yash. That was the caption which we saw on Times of India. So this was also one of the most talked about judgment. I thought I'll just cover this also. Although this is a 160-page judgment and it has dealt with various aspects. So we have tried to crystallize it so that it is easier for all of us to understand. And I hope you find that we have done some justice to this 160 pages. Yes, next slide, please. So in this matter also, notice under section 10(1) was issued alleging that SSC to be a beneficial owner of various foreign assets, bank accounts, and beneficiary of foreign bank accounts and beneficiary of foreign discretionary trust was issued on 22nd November 2017. At the first instance, the SSC challenged the jurisdictional validity of notice issued under section 10(1), contending that the proceedings are premature in a way that the SSC has time to file income tax returns for the relevant assessment year till 31st March 2018 by way of an appeal before CIT appeal. However, CIT appeal did not dispose of the said appeal. In the meantime, the assessing officer continued with the black money assessment proceedings. The SSC assailed the inaction of the CIT appeal by way of writ petition before the Honorable Bombay High Court. The Honorable Court ordered the CIT appeal to decide on jurisdictional challenge of the said notice within 4 weeks. However, no stay was granted on the completion of the assessment proceedings in the meantime. Thereafter, the AO was passed final assessment order holding the SSC to be the beneficial owner of certain foreign assets and making additions thereof as undisclosed foreign assets. The CIT appeal, who was directed by the Honorable Bombay High Court to pass the order with respect to jurisdictional challenge, did not adjudicate upon the same, however, proceeded with the incorporating the findings of the AO in the appellate order. Against the said order passed by the CIT appeal, the SSC preferred an appeal before the tribunal. Next slide, please. The SSC made the following submissions. The notice under section 10(1) were premature since the time limit for filing the ITR was available. The purported assets were under the disclosure before the Income Tax Settlement Commission, and accordingly, there cannot be two simultaneous assessment proceedings for the same assets. The SSC was in the earlier year held not liable for wealth tax in respect of funds lying in the offshore accounts, and also that SSC is only named beneficiary, not the sole beneficiary. The assets to the extent assessed under Income Tax Act has to be reduced from income to be assessed under Black Money Act, if any. The beneficial ownership was acquired by way of inheritance by all the descendants. The income of the offshore discretionary trust was not sourced from India. No income has been affected in favor of beneficiaries, and same can't be brought to tax in the hands of SSC. The revenue contended as under, since the assessment order passed under IT proceedings stand quashed by the High Court, there is no assessment for the foreign assets. On one hand, the SSC is settling the undisclosed foreign assets with Income Tax Settlement Commission, and on the other hand, claiming that he is not the beneficial owner is self-contradictory. Since the income with respect to foreign assets has not been taxed under IT Act, there is no immunity under the provisions of Section 512 available to the SSC. The scope and ambit of scope of proceedings under Black Money Act is much wider and is different than the nature of proceedings under the Wealth Tax Act. The ITT order with respect to the wealth tax proceedings was not in existence when notice under Section 10(1) was issued. Ergo, it did not hold any value in the present proceedings. Tribunal holds black money proceedings to be jurisdictionally defective, observing as under. The CIT appeal, instead of deciding the jurisdiction challenge by examining all the original materials produced, only relied upon the assessment order passed by the assessing officer in black money assessments proceedings only. The order passed by CIT appeal as unsustainable and violative of principles of national justice because no opportunity of being heard was afforded to the SSC. The ITT order under Wealth Tax Act has not been reversed by the High Court, and therefore CIT appeal was wrong to hold that the said order was not in existence when the notice under Section 10(1) was issued. The revenue cannot shift stands under different proceedings that involve same facts. In a way, they applied sort of a res judicata principles in that, not strictly, but yes. The assets made out of income assessed under Income Tax Act shall be excluded from the purview of undisclosed assets in Black Money Act. Further, there cannot be a simultaneous proceedings on the same asset income under the IT Act and Black Money Act. So this is again very important because we keep on taking this particular argument, this particular contention, that you cannot have simultaneous proceedings on the same asset or income under the IT Act and Black Money Act. So basically, you have to elect, the department has to elect whether you want to go under the Black Money Act or under the IT Act. You cannot simultaneously go under both. So this is one of the major arguments which we are taking before the honorable courts. So now taxation as beneficial owner would arise either on account of contribution of assets or funds or in receipt of any distribution or benefit from such trust, considering the same holds the ownership of the assets, cannot be thrust upon the SSC. So the final, just last slide, please. So the ITT in the conclusion said that, taxation as a beneficial owner would arise either on account of contribution of assets or on receipt of such distribution. So definitely this particular, the findings is supported by the decision of Vikram Singhji and Gondal, where they have said that it's a discretionary trust. So ultimately you'll get to know about a share when actually you receive it. So there is no distribution or benefit which you're getting from that particular trust. So thus the ownership of the assets cannot be thrust upon the SSC unless you find all those attending circumstances which actually go on to show that yes, you are the beneficial owner in that sense. So that's how wealth tax proceedings and findings under the wealth tax helped this particular SSC, to come out of the clutches of Black Money Act. So these are the two decisions on the Black Money Act. So we can now go on to the third one. So next slide, please. Yeah. So this one is with respect to Benami provisions. There are 2-3 things I wanted. Of course, I'll deal with the facts right now, but then definitely after I explain this particular judgment, there are 2-3 things, practical thing I thought I'll just discuss about that. That if a particular client of yours come to you and tell that let's go and file a writ petition. So we have to see that what particular state we should go and approach the writ court in an extraordinary jurisdiction. So, and a second thing which I want to talk about this judgment is that whether it was appropriate for the SSC to go to the High Court and ask and invoke this writ petition, writ jurisdiction. And thirdly, I would also like to touch upon the provisions of Section 24 and 26 of Benami Act, which actually tells us the procedure. So I thought for the benefit of everybody, I'll just talk about these 2 sections and the procedure. I'll get into that procedure and the sections a little later. First, I'll just tell you the facts, and then I'll tell you what are my thoughts that whether we should have gone, not gone, and what is the stage when one particular SSU should go to the High Court. What is that particular stage, that. All right, so I'll just explain the facts and then I'll deal with the section and then I'll tell my thoughts. So in this particular case, a search warrant was issued by the investigation wing of the IT department in the name of B. Ayyappan, the managing director of Kathir Kaman Jewellers Limited. A search was also conducted in the residential premises of Mrs. R. Sabitharani, the petitioner's spouse, wherein the petitioner also stays with his spouse. During the course of search, certain gold was found, seized, and in order to protect its interest, prohibitory orders were passed by the IT department. Though the said prohibitory orders were lifted, the IO passed the provisional attachment under Section 24 of the Benami Act, airing the petitioner as a beneficial owner of the property. In terms of the said transaction was entered, in terms of the said order, the transaction was entered into on 28 October 2016. Further, show cause notice under Section 26 of the Benami Act 2016 were also issued. Next slide, please. The petitioner challenged the provisional attachment order on the following grounds. The order is illegal and violative of the principles of natural justice for implicating the petitioner as the beneficial owner of the property in question, without issuing any notice or giving any opportunity of being heard. Then the amendments to Benami Act came into force on 1st November 2016 and thus would not apply to alleged transactions entered into on October 28, 2016, which would render the impugned order jurisdictionally defective. Thus, the very initiation itself is in the violation of the provisions of the Act. Also, the proceedings under the Benami Act are required to be independent proceedings, and an adverse finding by the IU against the petitioner based on statement of 1 B. Ayyappan recorded under Section 131 in the IT proceedings are unsustainable. The revenue in response to the petition contended as under the provisions of Benami Act 2016 are applicable retrospectively, except for Section 3, 5, and 8. Then immediately after the provisional attachment order, show cause notice under Section 26(1) was issued, scrupulously following the procedure under the provisions of the Act, and accordingly, no principles of natural justice are violated. Next slide, please. High Court, on examining the nature of impugned proceedings, held, though the petitioner has relied on subsection 3 to section 3, stating that whoever enters into a Benami transaction on and after the date of commencement of the Benami Transactions Amendment Act 2016 shall, notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 2, be punishable in accordance with the provisions contained in Chapter 7. Section 1(3) clarifies that other remaining provisions of the Act shall be deemed to have come into force on 19th May 1988. In the present case, investigation and search were conducted prior to the Amendment Act. The alleged Benami transactions were also occurred prior to the amendment, but the provisional attachment under Section 24 was made after the amendment, which is certainly permissible under Section 1(3). In the present case, it is not in dispute that the impugned order dated 12th May 2017 is an order of provisional attachment passed under Section 24(4)(a)(1) of the Benami Transactions Act 2016, and the second amendment order dated 26th May 2016 is the notice to show cause under Section 26(1) of the Act, and thus the commencement is legal. High Court takes note of the legal provisions and holds that the Act is unambiguous on the provisional attachment of the property, and it is only the commencement of the proceedings under the Act wherever the petitioner has to respond to the show cause notice by submitting their explanations, objections, along with the documents and evidences, and thereafter the authorities are bound to adjudicate the matter in the manner. Next slide, please. So this is how, in a way, this particular writ petition was basically dismissed. So I just wanted to give my thoughts, but before that, I thought very important for us to understand at what particular stage should we go to the High Court. So there are two important sections I thought I'll just explain before I give my thoughts on this particular judgment. There are Section 24. This is basically Chapter 4 of the Benami Act, and this deals with notice and attachment of property involved in Benami transaction. It says, Section 24 says, where the initiating officer, on the basis of material in his possession, has reason to believe that any person is a benamidar in respect of a property, he may, after recording reasons, in writing, issue a notice to the person to show cause within such time as may be specified in the notice why the property should not be treated as a benami property. And clause 2 says, where a notice under subsection 1 specifies any property as being held as a benamidar referred to in that subsection, a copy of the notice shall also be issued to the beneficial owner if his identity is known. And 3 says, where the initiating officer is of the opinion that the person in possession of that property held the benami may alienate the property during the period specified in the notice, he may, with the previous approval of approving authority by order in writing, attach provisionally the property in the manner as may be prescribed for a period not exceeding 90 days. Right? So moment you receive a notice under clause 3, so this is not the time when we should rush to the court. So generally the clients do come that we have received a notice under section 3 of 24. So should we go to the court? Because I am not the benamidar, I am not the beneficial owner, I am not this. So there can be a number of reasons why the person wants to go. But should we go to the court at that particular point of time is the decision we'll have to make at that point. Because show cause notice, there is a provision, next provisions which is important, and we need to answer to those. We straight away we shouldn't go and challenge the show cause notice. The initiating officer, after making such inquiries and calling for such reports or evidence as it deems fit and taking into account all relevant materials, shall within a period of 90 days from the last date in which the notice under subsection was issued, where a provisional attachment has been made under subsection 3. So what he can do is, he can pass an order continuing the provisional attachment of the property with the prior approval of the approving authority till the passing of the order by the adjudicating authority under subsection 3 of section 26. So section 26 is the process whereby adjudicating authority passes order, all right? And clause 2, he can revoke the provisional attachment of the property with the prior approval of the approving authority. So it is not that he's not having that particular power, he can do that. And clause B says where the provisional attachment has not been made under subsection 3, all right? Then what is he supposed to do? He's supposed to pass an order provisionally attaching the property with the prior approval of the approving authority till the passing of the order by the adjudicating authority under subsection 3. He can do this, or he can decide not to attach the property as specified in the notice with the prior approval of the approving authority. So clause B says he can either wait for the entire 26 to happen, or he may decide not to. Like for example, if I am a bona fide purchaser for value without notice, and if I'm able to show that how this particular property has been purchased by me and how I am the person who I'm a bona fide purchaser, then in that situation it may happen that the initiating officer may actually may decide not to attach the property. This may happen. Now, what is 26.3? That is also important for us to understand. So 26.3 says that again there is a power which the adjudicating authority has been given, and he has to act as per this particular section. It says the adjudicating authority shall, after considering the reply, if any, to the notice issued under subsection 1, make or cause to be made such inquiries and calling for such reports or evidence as it deems fit, taking into account all relevant materials, provide an opportunity of being heard to the person specified as benamidar therein, the initiating officer and any other person who claims to be the owner of the property, and thereafter he passes an order holding the property not to be benami property. And it's not that only the benamidar will get a chance, even any person who says that he is the owner, like in my example which I said, that he can be a bona fide purchaser for value without notice, even he can he can also participate in this particular proceedings, holding the property not to be a benami property and revoking the attachment order, or holding the property to be a benami property and confirming the attachment order in all other cases. So these are the steps which are there in the section itself. So it is very important, for us to understand that moment we get a show cause notice, it is important to respond to the show cause notice by giving explanation and should not rush to the court. So in this case, in my opinion, that they should have in fact responded to the show cause notices and then perhaps could, may have thought of going to the High Court if jurisdictional issues arose in that particular matter. So this is what I thought I'll just explain after I conclude. Can you have the next slide, please? Yeah, this is Yorkton Tech, which is again a decision from Delhi Tribunal. So this is again, I thought it is an important doctrine which the tribunal has tried to explain, and I was happy that even tribunal has dealt with this particular issue. So I thought I'll just explain. It says, as in this particular case, SSC is a subsidiary of Uphill Farms Private Limited, engaged in the business of construction and development of real estate projects in India. SSC acquired a real estate business as a going concern from its holding company by way of a slum sale. The assessing officer referred the matter to the TPO for determination of ALP in respect of business transfer agreement being a specified domestic transaction as per the provisions of section 92BA read with 92C. Transfer pricing officer rejected the slum sale valuation adopted by the SSC, and the proposed adjustment was included by AO in the draft assessment order. Thereafter, SSC filed objections before the DRP, stating that clause 1 of section 92BA of the Act has been omitted by the Finance Act 2017 and is not applicable in the impugned assessment year. Thereafter, DRP restricted the adjustment and deleted various other adjustments in favor of the SSC. Agreed by adjustment made under clause I of 92BA, SSC preferred this particular appeal before the tribunal. Next slide, please. Can we have the next slide? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thanks. It was submitted that clause I of 92BA have been omitted by the statute. Therefore, it is deemed that the said clause was never part of the Act. Further contended that action of revenue under clause I of section 92BA was invalid and bad in law and was made after the omission of clause I of section 92BA. Such an omission was made without an express saving clause or provision stating whether the pending proceeding shall continue. It is deemed that the said clause has been deleted since its inception in light of section 6 and 6A of General Clauses Act. To conclude, the main contentions of the SSC is that if a provision of clause I of section 92BA was unconditionally omitted, all actions must stop where the omission finds them. So on the other hand, learned CITDR submitted that the provisions of clause I of 92BA was there in the statute for assessment year 16-17 when transaction was entered. So the omission of the provision is prospective with effect from 1/4/2017, that is assessment year 17-18, and not retrospective to include assessment year 16-17. So this is a very important principle. Like for example, a particular clause is omitted. So should it apply to all proceedings which are pending on that particular date? Or still the department can argue that, this was omitted in a particular assessment year, so it should be applicable from that particular assessment year onwards. And any transaction which had entered prior thereto, or that particular clause can apply. So this is the fundamental argument which the department took. So the tribunal referred to the provisions of section 6 of General Clauses Act and came to a conclusion that omission would amount to repeal as per General Clauses Act. So tribunal on the issue observed that clause I of section 92BA has been omitted with effect from 1/4/2017 without any reenactment with modification or any saving clause in other sections of the Act. Further held that in absence of any saving clause, it is to be interpreted that clause I of section 92BA did not come into operation at all, especially when the proceedings are initiated after such omission. Further, tribunal held that no transfer pricing adjustment can be made on a domestic transaction which has been referred to by the assessing officer after the omission of the said clause by the Finance Act 2017, even though the transaction was undertaken in the assessment year 16-17. So basically, the particular section, the particular clause 92BI was there when this particular transaction had entered upon, but it was omitted with a particular date. So when the matter was being taken by the adjudicatory authority. So the department basically argued that, since this had been omitted from a particular assessment year, from a particular date which is available for a particular assessment year, she should be made applicable prospective and not retrospective. So any transaction which was entered in that particular year in which this particular provision was there should actually apply, and any adjustment in the domestic transaction can be made. So this is how the courts have basically the tribunal has dealt this particular matter. So the important doctrine comes is, if there is an omission in a particular act, does it mean that it is prospective, or will it mean that it's omitted then and there? Anything which happens, whichever has happened prior thereto, whatever effect has to be given, it has to be given then and there, and you just can't, you cannot raise it, you cannot take this omission beyond that particular date, and it has to get, the cutoff date will be that date itself, as if that particular clause never existed. All right. So, yeah, I think this is also one of the most, yes, sorry.
Madam, so whether this is, I mean, even for the prior assessment, this will be omitted, or only because it is for assessment year 17-18? If financial year 16-17 means assessment
No.
year 17.
See, this particular clause 92B1, it is omitted with a particular date. So any transaction, as per this tribunal order, it says that any transaction which had happened prior thereto, it will be treated as if this particular clause never existed. So this is basically they are treating omission provision as a repeal provision.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can have the next slide, please. I think this particular judgment is really talked about, and I think this is a welcome judgment. In the beginning, I want to say, and then of course, I think it's a big relief to the SSCs and the taxpayers, and it's a welcome judgment which the Karnataka High Court has pronounced. Of late, Karnataka High Court has passed many against decisions, but this is a welcome judgment. Yeah. All right. So I'll just deal with the facts, and then of course at the end I'll tell what are the key takeaways. So in this particular case, SSC companies carrying on the business of manufacture of iron and steel, and had claimed set off of the brought forward losses against the income declared under the head income from capital gains under section 72. The AO denied the set off of brought forward loss against capital gain, holding it to be contrary to the provision of law. The SSC preferred an appeal before the CIT appeal and ITAT, where the appeal was dismissed and disallowance stood confirmed. On appeal before the High Court, the following questions of law have been raised. Whether the tribunal was justified in law in not allowing the set off of carry forward business loss of rupees this much against capital gain arising on sale of business asset used for the purpose of business on the facts of the case. Whether the tribunal was, second question was, whether the tribunal was justified in law in not holding that the income arising out of sale of business asset has the character of business income. This is important. Character of business income. And consequently, the income, though assessed as capital gain, is entitled to set off against the carry forward business loss on the facts of the case. All right. So SSC submission was, the SSC made the following submissions. It is entitled to set off of brought forward loss against the income which has the attributes of business income, even though under the head other than profits and gains from business. Proviso to section 72(1) small 1 was omitted with effect from 1/4/2000, and there was no requirement to carry on business for the purpose of set off of brought forward business loss. So this was a particular section which was omitted. So this clause basically said that, to carry forward that business loss, you have to be in that particular business. So this got omitted in from 1/4/2000, which says that you don't have to carry on that particular business for the purposes of set off of brought forward business loss. So CIT versus Express newspaper is not applicable to facts of the case, since in that case the discussion was with respect to the fact that whether capital gains can be taxed in the hands of successor company. The revenue had put forth the following submissions. In order to consider the sale as business income, The asset must be stock in trade and not fixed asset. The asset was considered as a capital asset in balance sheet, and the consideration has been rightly treated as under the head of capital gains. Section 72 of the Act is not applicable to the present case, as this only permits setup of business loss against the profits and gains of business or profession, not any other head. Moreover, Section 72 mandates that carry forward business loss can only be set off against the profit from business carried on for that assessment year. Stress was laid on the word employed by the legislature, and it was contended that unabsorbed carried forward losses can be set off only against the income from business carried on by the SSE, assessable under the heads profit and gains. Proviso to Section 72(1)(1) was omitted by the Finance Act 1999 with effect from 1/4/2000. Therefore, for the assessment year in question, that is assessment year 3-4, the SSE was not required to have carried on the business for the purpose of set-off of brought forward loss. Section 72(1) employs the expression computation under the head profits and gains or profession, whereas Section 72(1)(1) does not use the expression under the head. Thus, the legislature has consciously left it open that any income from business, though classified under any other head, can still be entitled to the benefit of set-off. Supreme Court, in the case of Kokonada Radhaswamy, has held that business income can be broken up as income under various heads and still doesn't cease to be the income of business on account of mere classification under different head, rather purpose is to be seen. In that view of the matter, it was held that the SSE is entitled to set off of brought forward loss against income which has the attributes of business income. So this is important, that it can be brought forward loss can be set off against income which has the attributes of business income, even if. Next slide, Sanjana. Even if something is missing in that line. Just a minute. Even though under a head other than profit and gains from business. So attributes of business income was given a stress by this particular judgment, and they said that set off a brought forward loss against income which has the attributes of business income, even though under a head other than profits and gains from business, could be set off. So in my view, the key takeaways are, which is important for us, that the heads of income are prescribed in the Income Tax Act are only for the purposes of computation of income, and the same cannot be used to rule out the actual source of any income. Then the above, the ratio which has been laid down can be used to set off brought forward business loss against rent income, if you say, chargeable under the head income from house property, where the SSE is able to substantiate that the rent income is income earned from business assets. So if you're able to show that, if a particular income is earned and the particular income which is being earned is from a business asset, so then definitely it can be set off as per this particular judgment. So there are certain things which we have to keep in mind also. It is that in this particular judgment, which is decision of that the decision which is relied upon by the Karnataka High Court, in that particular case, the SSE is a banking company and was dealer in securities. So, which claimed brought forward losses against the income from interest on securities, and which has been offered to tax under the head income from other sources. So we can also place, there are some judgments which is there, which I can just mention. So which is from, I think there's a Mumbai tribunal again in the case of digital electronics. There is again, Mumbai tribunal only has given us judgment of smart sensors, digital electronics. All these judgments basically says that, when there is an income from capital gains on assets, being land or building, which is used for business purpose, it can be set off against brought forward unabsorbed business losses. So definitely, we cannot conclude with that this is a final judgment, this is a final view. We can have different views also, and I don't think this is going to settle here, because when we are talking about attributes of business income, and the example which I gave, that capital gains on assets, which is being land or building, and we are saying it can be used for business purpose, and that can also be set off against brought forward unabsorbed business losses. And there are cases which supports this particular view. So if this view is there, then we can't say that it is free from any controversy, and this has come to a rest here. This will definitely be taken to Supreme Court, I think, and this will be tried and tested there. So let's see ultimately what happens. But so far, right now it's concerned, I think it's a welcome judgment, and it's a big relief to the SSEs.
Madam, but there is a practical difficulty, because now all the return filing goes through a system-based approach rather than law-based approach.
The
ITR will still not accept the set-off.
No. In fact, you are absolutely right. When you're talking about system glitches, I think it's the every day in Delhi High Court. In fact, we are seeing the kind of glitches which SSEs are facing, and in fact, all these faceless cases and all the orders which are being passed, where we are saying that procedure of Section 144B has not been followed, and that opportunity of hearing, then the mandatory show cause notices, all that which we're talking about is all because they said that we are not able to upload. We are not able to, at that particular, I think May and June were the time when there were a lot of glitches, isn't it?
Apart from glitches, it is the logic in the ITR that which will not allow you to mention the amount of set off against of business loss against capital gains. That field will only not be enabled.
So that field is not able. Then what are you people doing?
No, in any such kind of controversial matters, unless the IT department enables the field, it is not possible for the SSE to claim such set off.
So is it there? It is not there in the drop down menu, or what is that?
No, they just allow based on the logic. They come out with the logic of that utility, and based on the utility only you can fill up the items. If if the business loss they don't allow to be mentioned against the capital gain income, you can't.
Right, so it's basically a set form which is there. Like for example, this particular judgment which you're talking about. See, like when we're talking about attributes of business income, I'm sure the computer generated system would not know. But capital gains which is there on assets, which is, for example, land or building, and we are saying, and that we are trying to set off against our unabsorbed business losses. Then we're talking about attributes of that business asset. I think that will be difficult for the system to understand. Then, so do you think this is going to give rise to litigation because of the system glitches?
Yes.
Okay. Like for example, I'm sharing my own personal experience in the context of GST. Like for example, in the GST portal, there was no concept of revision. Suppose an SSE has done some mistake and he wanted to revise those forms, GSTR forms. So there was no point. There was no such drop-down menu where he could revise it. So for that also, there are a lot of cases which have been filed before High Courts. So I think this portal glitches are going to be there, and people are facing problem in that sense. All right. If anybody has any question on this particular, we can talk about. That's not a problem, and then we can go to the next judgment. Not an issue.
Madam, there are a few people who have raised their hands. So should we take up
right now,
please,
or you can take it up? I think we can discuss. Not an issue.
Okay. So Mr. Lakshmikant Kothari has raised the hand, so I will allow him to raise his query.
Yeah, please.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, Mr. Kothari. Very good morning.
Very good morning. Okay, actually, my question was relating to that ITAT decision, but since we were discussing this last one, now as regard these glitches in the software,
Mm-hmm.
we have a Bombay High Court decision, I think, in the case of Samir Bojwani,
Mm-hmm.
and then there is one more even from the Delhi High Court, possibly even that was argued by Mr. Ajay Bora only. So
Mm-hmm.
what has happened is that whenever this system does not allow this kind of position to be taken as per law, the assessees are filing writ petitions where High Court is giving the direction to the department that allow such assessees to file the manual returns. So this is
Yes.
if the stakes are good enough, makes sense to go to High Court in a writ petition and get the direction as was done by Bombay High Court in the case of Samir Bojwani, and there is one more Delhi High Court decision.
Hmm.
So
This is invariably what we say. Like, for example, writ, of course, the writ courts are very bothered. They said, you're clogging us with, you have made us. In fact, every day we keep on hearing from Justice Manmohan, who is the roster bench before Delhi High Court. He says, you people are clogging us with, this kind of refund issue, that there is no set of issue, but there's no option. But when
yeah,
you
but
have nothing else, then the only thing which SSC can do is that you can go before the High Court, and writ is the only option which is available to us.
but
So
there
in
are
fact,
already precedents. I'm saying there are already precedents
yeah,
that when
correct,
the
correct. Agreed.
when the software does not allow, one can go to the High Court and get the direction for filing of a manual return.
Yeah,
So
correct, correct.
yeah, that was one. Actually, I had originally raised a query as regards that Delhi ITAT decision on the specified domestic transactions. So
Yes.
even the case was for assessment year 16-17.
Yes.
But the tribunal, and even if the provision was omitted from 1/4/2017, tribunal relying on the General Clauses Act
Yes.
and Supreme Court decision held that no, now as if this provision never existed.
Correct. Because
Now this was a case where assessee had gone up to the tribunal.
yes.
My question is that supposing there were adjustments and
Hmm.
assessee had not litigated, and considering the general clauses and also the Supreme Court, can assessee file rectification that the adjustment which was made pursuant to a non-existing provision needs to be deleted in a rectification proceedings.
All right. I'll just answer. So,
Yeah.
see, I think we all are aware. So, where 154 proceedings are concerned, there should be no debatable issue. It should be a mere error apparent on the face of record. So,
Right.
as per theoretically, if you ask me, definitely you can do it because there is an error because he has done this mistake has been done, and he has
Hmm.
relied on a provision which is not existing. But if you
Hmm.
really ask me from a practical aspect, they definitely assessing officer will not allow.
Yeah, but what will be chances of such things getting allowed in the appeal? Because see, we have a Supreme Court decision in Saurashtra Kutch Stock Exchange, where they have
In
said
the
that
context
you
of 254 right here.
sorry.
254, section 254 provision.
No. So see, whether 254 or 154,
Yeah, no,
the
yes,
provisions are same, except that in
correct.
154 only the tax authorities under 116 can do, and 254 IT80. Otherwise,
Tribunal can do it. Yes.
yeah. So only thing is the words are absolutely similar, except that which authority can
You're absolutely
do.
right. Error apparent on
So
face of record.
correct. So then, considering that Saurashtra, assuming AO does not allow, so he will say this is not a rectifiable mistake. Then one can go to this one that as per Supreme Court in Saurashtra Kutch, this is a rectifiable mistake, and therefore can appellate authorities allow relief in such cases if one files the appeal against the 154 order saying that this is clearly a
Yes,
rectifiable
you're right.
mistake.
You're right.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
So
see, Saurashtra Kutch was
possi-
mentioned in that particular case, what has happened is the
Hmm.
tribunal has omitted to consider a particular judgment which was there
Correct.
holding the field. So that's the
Right.
reason the Supreme Court said, I think Justice Kapadia's judgment only, he said specifically said that non-considering of a judgment which was holding a field and which was cited is an error apparent on face of record, and tribunal ought to have looked into it. So
Correct.
here we are talking about a particular provision which was omitted. So
Right.
the assessing officer ought to have looked into this particular provision and then pass order. So you
Right.
can't say, assessing officer can't say ignorance of law. If a particular provision is not there, is not there. So you can't act upon. Definitely it is an arguable case. Definitely the appellate authorities can give relief on this.
Big stakes one can try even rectification also if the time limit is available, right?
Time limit is there. One can try, but yes,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
recourse can always be taken.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Should we proceed, or if anybody has any other questions, so we can just take that question and then move forward to the next.
No, we can move forward.
Should we?
Yeah.
All right, fine. Thank you. The next judgment which we're talking about is from Kerala. This is Apollo Tyres. So I think this is also pretty interesting. So I just give the brief facts and then I tell. All right. Here also we have different. This is not the opinion which is final. We have contrary opinion also. I'll just talk about that a little later. So in this particular judgment, the SSC claimed set-off of long-term loss arising from sale of shares, mutual funds unit, on which STT was paid against long-term capital gains arising from sale of a land under Section 70 Clause 3. The AO rejected the claim of set-off of loss holding as under. Since the gains are exempt under Section 10, the same cannot be considered for claiming set-off. The assessing officer also held that Section 70 Clause 3 is only applicable for computing income under Section 48 to 55 of the Act. The ITAT and the CIT appeal concurred with the view of view taken by the assessing officer. On appeal before High Court, the following substantial questions of law were admitted: whether on the facts and in the circumstances of the case, the tribunal is justified in law in disallowing deduction of rupees this much, being advances paid to Continental Group of companies for supply of machinery and written off during the year, holding that the amount is of capital nature, is of capital expenditure. Whether on the facts and the circumstances of the case, the tribunal is justified in law in disallowing the setting of long-term capital loss on sale of shares and units. Next slide, please. That the SSC is entitled to SSC submission, that the SSC is entitled to set off of the loss from long-term capital asset covered under Section 1038, booked against the income earned on the sale of long-term capital asset. SSC contended that the criteria for attracting Section 1038, that income arising from transfer of long-term capital asset being an equity share in a company or a unit of an equity-oriented fund, the transaction is chargeable to STT. In the case on hand, the twin requirements are attracted. However, instead of earning income, the transaction resulted in a loss to the SSC. The loss is from the long-term asset and hence could be set off in terms of Section 70 Clause 3 of the Act. Provisions of Section 70 Clause 3 do not prohibit the SSC from availing the loss otherwise incurred by the SSC in respect of sale of a long-term capital asset that has been subjected to STT. In support of the argument, SSC relied on the judgments of Royal Calcutta Turf Club, Karamchand Premchand, Harprasad, and Kishori Bhai Virani. Revenue's argument was the AO disallowed the set-off of claim by the SSC under Section 70 Clause 3 of the Act. The reasoning of the AO is that income which is exempt under Section 10 should be removed from the purview of income before computation of the total income of an SSC. Further, since the income includes loss as well, the same should also be excluded while computing the total income. Section 73 applies only upon computation of income as per the provisions of Section 48 to 55, which is not the facts of the present case. The arguments of the AR of the department was that the first argument is that the SSC is mixing up heterogeneous heads as homogeneous heads and claiming set-off. The inclusion of an income as well as loss under Section 1038, otherwise excluded from purview of total income, would completely change the meaning of Section 70 Clause 3 of the Act, dealing only with computation of income and loss made under Section 48 to 55. Next slide, please. The question of law framed deals with the claim of the SSC to set off of the loss suffered by the SSC from the sale of long-term capital asset, that is shares, against the income earned from the sale of a long-term capital asset. While discussing the above, the High Court discussed the following. Chapter 3 of the Act deals with income that do not form part of the total income. Sections 10 to 13 are various incomes that are treated as not forming part of the income of the SSC. Chapter 4 deals with the computation of total income. Section 14 deals with the heads of income. Section 45 to 55 deal with the computation of capital gains, wherein Section 48 to 55 deal with the computation of long-term capital gains by the SSC. Chapter 6 deals with the aggregation of income and setup of carry forward of loss. The principle laid down by the Supreme Court in Harprasad and Company is that income is inclusive of profit and loss, that is both positive and negative effects of the transaction. Hence, it is legal and correct not to introduce the entry of sale of shares under section 1038 in the computation of income under sections 48 to 55. For claiming set off under section 73, the first requirement is computation made under section 48 to 58 in respect of any long-term capital asset in a loss. Therefore, to merit an adjustment under section 73, the SSE is required to first establish that the loss arrived at by the SSE is on the computation under sections 48 to 55 in respect of a long-term capital asset. The language of section 70 clause 3 is clear and unambiguous, and the Parliament intended homogeneous entries to adjust against the loss or profit against one another and not introduce heterogeneous elements or entries. So the efforts of the SSE includes an excluded claim, that is heterogeneous claim under section 70 clause 3 of the Act, by claiming that homogeneity of a long-term capital gain is satisfied by the SSE. Thus, the application of 73 is incorrect and illegal. So before I tell the contrary views, can I have the views of the participants here? Anybody wants to talk about this particular judgment? Any views on this particular judgment? Yes, Mr. Arora, can you please?
Just allow him to speak.
Yeah. Please. I thought, of course, this one judgment I think we should talk about.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Arora.
Mr. Arora, you can speak now.
Yes. So Kavita ma'am, the point I believe this was I think last year, if I remember, there was one Delhi tribunal decision in the case of Nikhil Shahani.
Nikhil Shahani, correct, absolutely. In fact, argued by our firm only.
Yes, I think where the verdict went against the appellate.
Yes.
Yes, and I believe there is also a Mumbai tribunal decision for which is, if I remember, is in favor of the SSE.
Yeah, in fact, there are 2-3 judgments, which of course I'll be talking about, like Nomura India Investment, Rare Investment, Somnath Vajanath Sakre, they all have been in favor of the SSE. Because there the concept has been that, the source of income by which capital gain is arising, that is not exempt from tax. So that is how the those tribunals have taken a view. So I thought before I actually say that there are contrary views, and in fact Mumbai tribunal has done some good to the SSE. They have given these judgments in favor. So they all have gone on the concept of this. They have gone that source of income is per se not exempt. So if source of income per se is not exempt, then you can't say that any transaction or any attributes which is happening to that particular transaction if it is exempt, you can't say that this has to be this claim has to be denied to the SSE only on the ground that long-term capital gain is exempt under section 1038 of the Act. So that these are the views which these tribunals are having.
And I think this argument was taken, ma'am, in that Nikhil Shahani's case also, if I recollect. It's a very detailed order written by Amit Shukla ji, if I remember.
Yes, you're right. Absolutely right. And in fact, all these arguments we had taken also, we'd given a written submission explaining that, that judgment of, if you remember that Nitisoft India, that Mumbai tribunal again.
That Rapatos or something, and I think it was argued by Mr. Dastoor, if I recollect.
Yeah, Raptokas Brett. Yes,
it was argued by Mr. Dastoor. But ma'am, has that decision been appealed in the High Court? Because
yes.
The Mumbai tribunal decision, I remember, probably is not appealed. Maybe the tax effect, or there is some challenge to that.
Calcutta, it's not Calcutta. This Delhi, the Sahani matter, we are actually taking it to the High Court.
Yes, the Sahani is taken, but not the Mumbai one, if I remember rightly, ma'am. I'm not.
Raptokas Bread and Company, 69 SOT.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
But could be due to tax effect?
Something has happened, maybe due to tax effect or something. So there is that viewpoint, but given that, what do you think, ma'am, is a better view of the matter? Should the loss be allowed to be set off or not?
No, that's what I said. If you really ask me that, that source, I said this is not. There are contrary views available. I will definitely go I will definitely take the view which is in favor of the SSC.
So, ma'am, there is this good, there is this normally people say when you are advising the client and when you are in litigation, there are two perspectives.
Yeah,
While I agree, when I'm in litigation, I'll certainly rely on whatever is available and try to hinge on the last thread. But when I'm planning and when I'm suggesting, there are a lot of compulsions that come into being. And hence, this concept that is being developed these days in all accounting firm is more likely than not. So what do you think is more likely?
No, more likely than not is, I think, because of that index, isn't it? More likely than not is one column which we are giving nowadays on the litigation status is not because of, I think it is because of index, isn't it?
No, also, ma'am, many clients want that, am I going to succeed ultimately? Because nobody wants, in the end, because there is this automatic initiation of penalty. A lot of foreign companies don't want that, and they have to answer to the board. So they want a sort of a comfort rather than more likely than they're not. They normally say, what is there more likely than not, or a term being used is what is your confidence level or a should level comfort, So they want that sort of, being this diverse decision. My question was, if you are planning, would you think that these are good decisions to rely on and take the proposition that loss should be allowed to be set off?
Yeah, see, I'll tell you, basically, we should definitely take this, that loss should be allowed. Okay. Because, what are the things which definitely comes in our mind? Mind is whether ultimately this claim is allowable or not allowable, right?
Yes.
So far, courts are concerned, actually, we can't say with a definitive that yes, this is going to be allowed in favor of the SSC, because we don't know which particular matter will go before which court, right? Generally, out of my experience, since I'm practicing in Supreme Court and High Court both, that you may have the best case and you are absolutely superb on merits and on law also, but you don't know you're before whom and how is that particular judge going to take your matter. So right now, if you really have to advise that yes, we are going to win, even the best of facts matters I have seen, my own personal experience, we have lost, and the worst cases we have won. It can happen.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
So only, I think, as a precaution, if you ask me that what is the precaution we should keep in mind is that if a particular claim, if you think it's a debatable claim and there are judgments, if there are, like for example, tribunal, I'll say this, if a Bombay tribunal is, maybe there is judgments from Mumbai tribunal, there may be 10 cases, but then we'll consider it as one, right? Because all this is Mumbai view. But if we have Kolkata also, we have Karnataka also, and there are 3-4 views which are available, which is in favor of the SSC, then we can try and develop this. Ultimately, see, we can't say law is settled.
Yeah.
Right. So the respite to the client would be that since the issue is debatable, various tribunals, various courts have taken different views. So no penalty per se is
absolutely. And
at least if you can save your client from penalty and prosecution, then of course we should definitely try and tell them that this is a possible argument, we can take it.
And ma'am, the other food for thought these days becoming, in litigation is whether it's a fit case, and how do I define a fit case? I may be a practicing CA where I may have a loss of, say, of an SME sector of 10 lakh, 15 lakh rupees, maybe 20 lakh rupees, and that may be a sufficient amount or a big enough amount for a particular SME. But there, for a large corporate, that may not be an amount worth considering, So the point that I'm trying to say here in today, everybody is saying in a faceless environment, is it a fit case to fight? And how do I define a fit case is also becoming challenging, because, one, you're not there, personal hearings, writs are being disposed of, but then everybody is not going, before the High Court. Delhi High Court has been very, very favorable in all this writ matters. I haven't read a single adverse order on this aspect.
I should tell we as the firm, as VASH has been is highly responsible for this kind of orders.
Yes, I've read all those orders, ma'am. But this is another challenge that everybody is facing these days. That what's a fit case to litigate? Is 50 lakh rupees a fit case? Is 1 crore a fit case? Or what is the fit case? Because if you look at the cases that are coming up, all those additions are huge.
All right. I'll give you an example that, if you really ask me from my personal experience, which matter I treat as you rightly said, the 10 lakh amount for an SME is a very big amount, but for a large corporate, it's nothing. So we as chartered accountants and lawyers, we can't see tax effect in the matters and then decide that if tax effect is less than this, then we can go to CIT or ITT or High Court. We have to see that which particular SSE is facing what problem, and this particular money will help him how. So that's how we decide. In my example I'm giving, like in one of the matter which I'm arguing before Delhi High Court, the problem with the client was very small amount. In fact, I started my argument by saying that, my lords, the amount involved is very small, but the problem is huge. So the court asked me, so what is that problem? I said, my lords, so far my client is concerned, tax, there was an interest amount. He had given interest to a particular client, particular customer X. Interest was also deducted, but that particular customer, his proceedings went in an IBC. All right. So tax was deducted, but since in his AS 26, this amount was not reflected, the department declined to give benefit of the TDS. And they said that since amount is not reflected, sorry, we can't give you that credit. So this particular SSE is facing, he has to pay tax again because the customer has already gone under IBC. And so, but they have accepted that there is, the new tax has been deducted and there is a liability. But in this kind of a scenario, what are you supposed to do? The amount involved is very small. But what is the solution? The solution is you have to go to the writ court and then you have to explain. So I think I decide, what is the implication that a particular matter can have in a particular situation. So that's how I decide that, yes, it's a fit case. Maybe the amount involved is small, but implication is huge. So I thought, and I decided, in fact, I'm arguing that particular matter before Delhi High Court. So if you ask me, I'm telling you my personal experience. That's how I decide, irrespective of the amount involved.
No, noted, Kavita ji. This is one view of the matter, but there are many people who may not want to litigate just because the amount, the efforts. Many people don't have an organized tax office or tax department. So there are so practically these are the few things that are coming up. And
you're right, absolutely right.
And with faceless, one question everybody is asking us is that what do you see the chance of success? Would you be able to explain when the issue is really litigated?
I think it is bleak. If you really ask me, in this faceless scenario, and especially when you have got assessment unit, review unit, and all units are so disoriented. If you have given something to someone, some unit, actually you are actually arguing a matter before a computer system.
And ma'am, may I just highlight one instance you have raised? In my case, one ESOP disallowance of a Bangalore jurisdiction ESOP deduction was disallowed. It's covered by that Biocon case.
Okay.
AO made an addition under section 115 BB. Now, can you imagine an ESOP disallowance being added under 115 BBE, and it's a loss case where a demand of huge amount is being raised for nothing because no loss is being disallowed. So these are the challenges that are coming up.
See, these are practical difficulties which you are mentioning, and I think these kind of a scenario, and these, I think the only recourse would be, if you really ask me, that faceless, I think every SSE, every chartered accountant, every advocate is facing a trouble.
Absolutely.
There and just imagine of a situation when tribunal is going to be faceless.
Yes. Oh, that is going to be another
nightmare.
I think even there is a challenge from the side of department when they have to understand the facts with the written submissions. We have also to take a download of the knowledge from the client so as to understand the case. So just by writing, the complicated business transactions cannot be explained in all the cases. Anyways, I think we should move forward because there are in the interest of time. Before we move forward, Prashant Maharshi sir has commented that the matter is pending before the Bombay High Court. In this case,
sir has joined here.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, grateful to him. Welcome. That's very nice.
Thank you.
And we must thank him for at least telling us, informing of this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
All right, so should we move on to the next judgment?
Yeah.
And I must say that, I thought, of course, as lawyers, whenever you get an opportunity, you keep on talking. So, and especially right now, we are not meeting physically. We are not able to talk to all of each one of you, and we are not meeting also. So, I don't want to lose on any opportunity of sharing the problem, the difficulties, the pluses, the minuses which are facing in high courts and Supreme Court. So just, excuse me if you think that, I have just gone overboard talking about the topics which, I'm supposed to only deal with the judgments and not otherwise. So I just took the liberty from all of you. So should we go to the next judgment?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you. So next judgment which we're dealing is, it's a Karnataka High Court judgment. This is Karnataka State Cooperative Apex Bank, and this is for assessment is 7-8. In this, the SSC was carrying on banking business, and for assessment 7-8, original return was processed under section 143(1) without being scrutinized under section 143(3). Thereafter, notice under section 148 was issued, and in response to which a return of income reducing the total income on account of additional claim for loss on sale of securities was filed. The AO in the reassessment order disallowed the additional loss claimed in the reassessment proceedings. The CIT appeal and ITAT upheld the view of the assessing officer. On appeal before the High Court, the following questions of law were raised: whether the tribunal is right in applying the ratio of the decision of the Honorable Supreme Court in CIT versus Sun Engineering, and holding that concluded issue in the original proceedings cannot be re-agitated in reassessment proceedings, even though the case of the appellant is distinguishable in as much as there was no original assessment proceedings on the facts of the case. Whether the tribunal was justified in law in not appreciating that the notice under section 148 of the Act was issued to SSC to assess the income, and thus all contentions in law remained open for the appellant to agitate by filing a return in response to notice under section 148. Then whether the tribunal is justified in law in holding that the appellant is not entitled to make additional claim of loss incurred in the reassessment proceedings under section 147 on the facts of the case, and whether the tribunal was right in not holding that the appellant is entitled to the additional claim of actual loss incurred on account of sale of government securities on the facts and circumstances of the case. So these were the questions which were raised. So SSC submission, the SSC in support of making an additional claim, the SSC in support of making an additional claim in the return filed in response to the notice under section 148 of the Act submitted as under. There was no scrutiny assessment. There was no scrutiny assessment was made under section 143(3), and only an intimation was issued under section 143(1) for the year under consideration. The intimation under section 143(1) of the Income Tax Act is not an order of assessment. In that view of the matter, in the absence of there being an original assessment proceedings, an additional claim was not assessed by the AO, which could have reached finality. That apart, the earlier assessment orders get effaced on commencement of reassessment proceedings. So these are basic arguments of the SSC. The revenue objecting to the additional claim filed by the SSC submitted as under. Proceedings under section 148 has limited scope related to the escaped income and don't extend to revising, reopening, or reconsidering the whole assessment. Any omission or wrong statement has to be rectified by filing revised return under section 139 clause 5. And in case the time prescribed for revision expires, then the only remedy to rectify such defect available to the SSC is to seek condonation of delay under section 119. The reassessment proceedings are for the benefit of the revenue and not for the SSC. Being so, no fresh claims can be made by the SSC in the proceedings under section 148. There is no scope to re-agitate questions which had been decided in the original assessment proceedings. High Court, distinguishing with Supreme Court decision relied by the revenue in case of Sun Engineering Works held, decision relates to assessment tiers before amendment in section 143(1). Decision was not seized with the controversy of assessment under section 147 being taken up for the first time, and therefore ratio emanating therefrom cannot be applied. That an intimation under section 143(1) of the Act cannot be treated as an order of assessment. Relying on the decision of Supreme Court in the case of KL Srihari, held that a fresh assessment is to be taken up under section 147. The earlier assessment order stands effaced by the subsequent order under section 147. The SSC is therefore entitled to raise a fresh claims in such proceedings, and the AO was required to consider the proceedings de novo and to consider the claim of the SSC. I think it's a simple decision, but anyways, this raises that even in reassessment proceedings, you can raise a fresh claim, and that the assessing officer has to consider. All right. So with this, we come to the last judgment. I think this is also an interesting judgment, and I think it's a very, very welcome judgment for all the SSCs. This is with respect to this additional claim of interest. Okay, I'll just explain the facts. In this, Wipro Limited was engaged in the business of manufacture of computer software and providing IT-enabled services for assessment day 8-9. Declared an income of rupees 588 crore, but was assessed at rupees this much in terms of DRP order, inclusive of TP adjustment of 10.54. On an appeal made by both SSC and the revenue with IT-80, order was passed under section 254, partly favoring the SSC and partly issues were remitted to TPO for recomputation of the transfer pricing adjustment. Consequently, the order resulted in a refund inclusive of interest under section 244A, since the tax paid by the SSC was more than the tax payable. Later, the files of the petitioner were transferred to another AO, before whom rectification application was filed under section 154 that resulted in enhancement of refund and also the interest under section 244A1A. However, the assessing officer denied additional interest of rupees 58.65 crores, calculated at 3% per annum, envisaged under section 244(1)(a) for the period of February 28, 2017, that is the date of IT-80 order, to May 4, 2019, that is the date on which refund was finally granted, that is 17 months. Petitioner thus preferred a writ petition challenging the action of AO. Petitioner submitted that the amendment made by the Finance Act 2016 contemplates two scenarios. Section 153(3) making a fresh assessment order pursuant to appellate order that have been set aside or cancelled the assessment, and clause B, section 153(5) giving effect to the appellate orders other than those covered by fresh assessment orders. In that view of the matter, the petitioner pointed that the amended provisions provide for grant of additional interest if the cases falls under section 153 clause 5. Further, the orders under section 244A1A can be classified into two categories. That is, where a fresh assessment or reassessment needs to be made, and where only effect is to be given to the appellate orders without any requirement of conducting any fresh assessment. The direction given to TPO by IT-80 for adjustment of refund amount would not fall under the category A. The transfer pricing adjustment would amount for a refund of a paltry sum of 3.8 crore as compared to refund of rupees 978 crore. And it would be offending to sense of fairness and professionality if such huge refund is held back just on the pretext of deciding a small TP issue. Also submitted that TP adjustment is not determinative of the refund amount since the tax amount is based on book profit. Petitioner contended that interest under section 244A1A was intended to bring parity in the converse situation where the revenue levies interest on delayed payment of taxes as provided under section 234B. Revenue submitted that in terms of section 244A1A, the SSC is entitled to an additional interest only in cases where there is no requirement of fresh assessment or reassessment in terms of appellate orders, but since an assessment or reassessment cannot be done in a piecemeal or in a truncated way, the total income of an SSC can be determined only after the fresh assessment or reassessment is accomplished. The revenue further submitted that section 240 that contemplates refund only after the accomplishment of the exercise mandated under the appellate order, that is either assessment is set aside or cancelled with the direction to undertake a fresh assessment or reassessment, stated that the question of granting interest arises only after the ascertainment of amount to be refunded, which happens only after the fresh assessment or reassessment is done in terms of the IT-80 order. Pointed out that the time limit of 3 months prescribed under section 153(5) for passing or giving effect to orders is applicable only in cases where no fresh assessment or reassessment is contemplated under the appellate orders, and since in the instant case the matter was remitted to TPO for fresh assessment reassessment, SSC's case does not fit into section 244A1A. Revenue pointed out that the expression wholly or partly employed under section 153(5) and section 244A(1)(a) to mean a fresh assessment or reassessment to be made wholly or partly, and interpreted that the said expression does not qualify the order to give effect to the order on appeal. Thus, the matter remitted to TPO and to the AO for de novo consideration, though in certain aspects, the SSC is not entitled to additional interest under section 244(1)(a) until the matter is decided. Revenue observed that the ITAT passed the order following SSC's earlier order for assessment set 3, 4, and 4, 5, according to which TP adjustment was proposed to undertake a fresh exercise in terms of direction given in the early order. This exercise warrants a judicious approach since the matter merits re-examination of the issue in the light of the orders of the tribunals, makes it fall under the next slide, please. In order to clarify the meaning of assessment and difference between assessment and assessment order, court reproduced Sir Rajendranath Mukherjee. It has been held under the erstwhile Income Tax Act that the word assessment is not confined to the definite act of making an order of assessment. Discussed CIT versus Purushottam Das, it was held that the passing of an assessment order is only an integral part of the process of assessment, and therefore the word assessment cannot be confined to the act of making an order of assessment. There is a certain legal difference between the terms of assessment and assessment order. It can be stated that the use of the word assessment would mean, just a second. I'm so sorry. While discussing about limitation period under 1961 Act, the code reproduced C. Ramaiah Reddy observed that if proceedings are not initiated within the time prescribed, the remedy is lost, and the SSC would acquire an indefinable right. Such right accruing by the lapse of time cannot be at the mercy of the officials who do not discharge their duties within the prescribed period or a reasonable time. In the matter of limitation, question of prejudice does not arise. Legislative intent forthcoming from the notes and clauses to the Finance Bill 2016 states that the interest under section 244(1)(a) would not accrue in cases of fresh assessment or reassessment. The use of words wholly or partly would indicate that the bar of interest accrual is confined only to that part of assessment that are occasioned by remittance, remand, and would not extend to other concluded issues that give rise to refund under section 153(5). Interest under section 244(1)(a) has to be granted in respect of refund arising on such issues that are concluded, and that pendency of consideration on remitted issues does not interdict the statutory accrual of. Next slide, please. There's one line which was missing on the last slide. I thought I'll just complete that line. It says, does not interdict the statutory accrual of interest. An argument to the contrary cannot be countenanced without straining the text and context of the provision. That line, last line was missing in the last slide. I thought I'll complete. And then I must admit, while reading this particular judgment, I have thoroughly enjoyed the kind of the quotes and the way this judgment has been written by the Honorable Judge. I think this is fantastic. Honorable High Court on carefully analysis of ITAT order observed that the appeal is allowed only for statistical purpose, which means that it is a case where the ITAT has held some issues definitively, and on some other it had remitted the matter to the AO, TPO for a limited consideration afresh. Clarified that ITAT has not directed assessment or reassessment at all, but it is only asked the TPO to follow its direction in the earlier year. Where issues are set aside, the AO was supposed to adhere to the provisions of sections 153 clause 5 based on the principles laid down by the ITAT, whereas section 153.3 used the term fresh assessment. In pursuance of the orders passed, setting aside or cancelling an assessment, therefore, this term fresh assessment, though not defined, contemplates a new assessment consequent to the higher authorities cancelling or setting aside the assessment. Section 153 clause 5 talks of giving effect to an order passed by the higher authorities, wholly or partly, otherwise than by making a fresh assessment or reassessment. High Court does held that in respect of issues which are set aside, there is a definitive holding. Section 153 clause 5 would apply, and the AO ought to have passed an assessment order under section 153 clause 5, following the principles already laid down by the superior forum. I could accepted SSC's submission that if refund was granted immediately, the claim for additional interest in terms of 244(1)(a) would not have arisen. Further, since the tax paid by the SSC was more than the tax payable on the book profit, it can safely be stated that no part of the refund payable, that is rupees 1380 crore, arose because of the reduction in the transfer pricing adjustment, merely amounting to rupees 25 lakhs. Thus, the contention of the revenue militates against the rule of proportionality and fairness standards. I could reject the revenue's contention that any order giving effect to the order of ITAT will result in redetermination of the SSC's total income and therefore will constitute a fresh assessment, as it would lead to an absurd conclusion that every order giving effect has to be considered as a fresh assessment or reassessment, and therefore would be outside the purview of section 153 clause 5. And consequently, any delay in granting actual refund would also be outside the ambit of 244(1)(a), defeating the very object for which the provision had been brought in the statute book. This was the final, and thus the petition was allowed, and the SSC was held to be, SSC was held that the High Court has held that SSC was entitled to additional interest of 3%. I think it's a welcome judgment, but I can see that, of course, revenues won't be granting refund on time, and there can be writ petitions again lined up in the High Court for grant of refund and interest. So I think this can fairly happen again. So this may give rise to, since this is a favorable judgment, this will give rise to further litigations before High Courts. So I think I have completed my last judgment, and I think I stick to the time. It's 3 minutes to 1. So that 3% additional which was granted, I have saved here.
So Madam, can we have 1 or 2 questions?
Yes, please.
So Mr. Lakshmikant Kothari has once again raised his hand. I have allowed him to speak. Mr. Kothari, you can raise your query.
Yeah, please.
Yes. Ma'am, see here, the argument of the revenue was that order giving effect is not a piecemeal or truncated process, But at least in this case, the AO could have given effect to the orders of the tribunal subject to this 3-4 crore, and thereafter the subsequent order could have been passed, no?
No, so you are saying that,
you give the part appeal effect of whatever 900 crore addition was there, and that the TPO thing can wait, no? And then thereafter there can be a further order giving effect or whatever, or earlier order can be modified.
No, but that's the reason they're saying, it's a proportionality thing you have to keep in mind. That because they did not give effect to that order saying that 900 crores were involved because of the TP thing. So you are saying that they could have passed truncated appeal effect order.
Yeah, so subject, except for that the set aside relating to TP issue, the order giving effect could have been passed, and then thereafter the order giving effect could have been revised with the.
Do you think in practically this happens? Do they ever pass orders in truncated fashion? That they give effect to the order, and then whatever remit is, either they'll decide in one go and then finish it off. This doesn't happen.
Not recently. It's not happening recently, but actually
I'm into one particular point of time.
Yeah. Because I'm into this practice for 25, 27 years. So earlier it used to happen that way, that whatever is set aside, the separate order is given, and subject to that, the order giving effect was being given,
Yeah, but of late, I don't think last 10 years I've not seen part. At least appeal effort order has been passed by the assessing officer in a truncated fashion. If they would have done that, they would have at least saved on the interest part.
And yeah, so then in that case, we have the incentive of 3% additional interest. No, if they
That's
don't
right.
pass it that way. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
The reason I said, because we are seeing in High Court that people are coming for a refund, wrong adjustment under different heads. Earlier refunds has not been granted. In fact, the High Court is clogged with these kind of cases also. So now we can see a new leg of cases, which definitely I'm sure the assessing officer are not going to give this 3% additional. They'll keep on arguing because till the time they get a definitive order from Supreme Court, they have to keep on agitating. And the SSCs will keep on going to the High Court now in a writ petition, taking help from this judgment. So in that way, I'll say this is a welcome judgment, but again, opening a plethora of further litigation.
But then make sense in bigger stakes, because now bank interest is also 6%. So here you get 9%.
Yes, correct. I think the High Court has beautifully interpreted 153.5.3. In fact, I liked his quotes also. He used the Kautilya's Arthashastra, that revenue should behave like honeybees. They should collect nectar, but they should not leave a sting on the flowers. So similarly, he's compared the SSCs that you can collect taxes from us, but don't inflict pain on us. I think he's very beautifully written the judgment, explained the entire concept: assessment, reassessment, truncated, the various provisions, 244(1)(a), 153(3), 153(5). I think I really enjoyed while I read this particular judgment.
Another issue is on the second last judgment. We always understood that Sun Engineering,
yes,
so far before this judgment, is that fresh claim cannot be made in the reassessment proceedings, right?
Correct.
Now we have this High Court, and they have said that there was no 143.3. And 143.1, because of the Rajesh Jhaveri, is not an assessment order, and therefore there was no 143.3. But I think somewhere even in the judgment they are further also saying even in case of 143.3 also you can make a claim in the reassessment proceedings, right? In that very judgment.
143.3, I don't think they have observed this.
I think towards the end.
They've always understood as I have the copy of the judgment.
Yes, I think somewhere towards the end. I think somewhere towards the end they are also saying that even though this was a case of 143.1, but even in the 143.3 cases also, the claim can be made in the reassessment proceedings.
Karnataka has given us good crops, huh?
Correct. So actually, I had read this decision, and somewhere they have even towards the end they said, okay, this was a case in 143.1, but even in case of 143.3 also.
I'll just confirm.
Because
I remember I read in the context of 143.1, because last paragraph also talks about 143.1. That is paragraph 11.
Somewhere
for everybody's benefit.
Somewhere they have said, I think.
I'm talking about the conclusion. Conclusion is with respect to 143.1 only. All right, I'll read for everybody's benefit from the judgment itself. It says, in the instant case, admittedly, there is no original assessment order in the case of the SSC, and it was only an intimation under section 143.1 of the Act, which cannot be treated to be an order in view of the decision of the Supreme Court. Therefore, the question of reassessment of the income of SSC by the assessing officer does not arise. In the proceedings under section 148 of the Act, it was the first assessment, and the same could have been done considering all the claims of the SSC. Therefore, the decision rendered by the Supreme Court in Sun Engineering had no application to the fact of the situation of the case, even assuming, for the sake of argument, that if an intimation under section 143.1 of the Act is considered to be an order of assessment. Maybe this is perhaps you must have read.
Yes.
That even if 143.1 is considered as to be an order of assessment, in the subsequent reassessment proceedings, the original reassessment proceedings get effaced, and the assessing officer was required to consider the proceedings de novo and to consider the claim of the SSC.
Correct. So therefore, here they are saying, they have said 143.1 is not an order of assessment, but they are saying even if it was an order of assessment, which means that even if the original assessment was say 143.3, still and there is a reassessment, still it is possible to make a fresh claim in the reassessment as per this judgment.
So this is what, correct.
But my point is that before the judgment we just understood Sun Engineering, So whether this is a sustainable judgment in the sense that, I mean, this is somehow, I mean, this was always our understanding, you know.
No. I don't think. If you ask me, I don't think this may not be the correct view.
No, but see, we are saying this may not be. The only thing is that they have relied another Supreme Court decision, which is post Sun, because I think Sun Engineering is 198. They have relied on some
198, I did 198, but Sun Engineering, we have always understood that, you know, this is for the benefit of the revenue. If a reassessment proceeding is started, then this will only for the benefit of the revenue, and it is not for the benefit of SEC. So any
correct, but then yes. Deciding this in favor of SSC, they have relied Supreme Court decision in 250 ITR, you know. So then so if this 250 ITR was always available, I don't know why we were thinking on the basis of only Sun Engineering, or this is a wrong view. I just wanted to know this, because really one can rely.
No, that's what I said. My prima facie view would be, you know, it will be difficult if you ask me my view, then I may not agree with this particular view. But of course, when there is a decision which is in favor of the SSC, why not take advantage of that judgment?
No, but what about the 250 ITR? 255 is not 250 ITR which they have relied, deciding in favor. So that is that not saying what they have quoted? Have they quoted that 250 ITR wrongly or what?
250 ITR.
Because they are saying, okay, Sun Engineering, but now you have 250 ITR, and because they follow 250 ITR Supreme Court, and that is how it went in favor of the SSC, you know. So if that 250, there is a subsequent decision to Sun Engineering.
Logic and the conclusion, they ultimately, if you really see the logic and the conclusion, they're only going on that particular point. I'll just tell you which particular information. They have only distinguished this Sun Engineering.
Yes.
All right. All right. They're talking about KL Hari.
So then they have relied on Supreme Court. They have
relied on KL Hari paragraph 4. So
right.
You have to basically see what this KL Hari talks about. They are not saying
they are not saying anything about KL Hari in this decision. They just relied on.
Yes.
Okay. So if that so if the KL Hari is not in favor, then possibly this seems to be a wrong decision, because we always understood Sun Engineering before this decision, you know.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.